I went into Jason Reitman's new film Saturday Night about the behind the scenes chaos that in the hours leading up to the premiere episode of Saturday Night Live in 1975 with a bit of trepidation because I'm never great about films that are biopics or that are about people I know, not personally, but people who I know what they look and they sound like, or scenarios that I know about well, or people that I'm a big fan of being played by somebody else. And it's hard for me sometimes to get into these movies. And being a huge fan of the original Saturday Night Live cast when I was a little kid, when they're still the cast of the show, and in the ensuing years where they were making their movies and TV shows, and they were just like the rock stars, the punk rock stars of comedy in that period, late 70s, early 80s. Going into seeing a film about with other people playing them, I was a little bit like, oh, am I going to be able to get into this? There are two things about this film that I was thinking going in. One is, am I going to be able to enjoy the performances and the movie for what it is? Or am I going to spend the whole time looking at each actor who plays someone I'm very familiar with and going, well, they kind of sounded like him there. She kind of looks like her right there. He kind of did that part accurately. Am I going to just be doing that and not following the story and the characters? And am I going to be taken out of the fact that I know a lot about what went on that first season of SNL or that first cast? Because I read an excellent book called Live from New York that was released many years ago that was just a deep dive into the origins of Saturday Night Live and all of its players and all of the behind the scenes workings on how that show came to first hit the air and stay on the air. So I was worried that I would go in here and just see the stuff that was phony and all this other stuff. And I'm happy to report that none of that happened. I mean, it kind of did happen. For a little while, you are saying, wow, she doesn't look like Gilda Radner at all, but she sounds a lot like her. And he kind of looks like Belushi when he does certain things and all that. But eventually that just went away and I was invested in this story. Oh, and the other thing, we kind of know how it ends. The whole thing is, will they or won't they get the show on the air? And it's like, well, 50 something years in, we kind of, or almost 50 years later, we kind of know Saturday Night Live made it on the air and stayed on the air. So the tension, I guess it speaks to the quality of the filmmaking and Reitman's quality as a director that you can watch this show and you can get caught up in that tension. Oh my God, are they going to make it on the air? Is the plug going to get pulled? Are they going to play a Johnny Carson rerun instead of this episode of the show? Is it never going to happen? I mean, we all know, and it still works. You know, it works. I saw somebody refer to it as feeling like Birdman, and that it was this constant kind of low key score, and the camera's constantly moving and everybody, it's chaos everywhere. You're getting glimpses of people and bits of people in a quick line and they leave, and it just works. If you're a big fan of SNL, totally worth watching. If you're not a fan of SNL, I'm very curious. Like, if you don't know about these people and where this went, clearly it will work as a backstage thriller, I guess you would call it, because it's just that well made. Now, as far as the performances go, you have, I'm going to look at the cast list because I'm not familiar with all these people, some by sight, but not by name. You have Gabriel LaBelle as Lorne Michaels. He is excellent. He is the glue that holds the whole thing together, much like the show, it's SNL itself. He is the person that we are following in this movie. It's his mania. It's his fear. It's his trying to spin all the plates at the same time while people are throwing rocks at the plates that are spinning. It's just, he holds it all. He really ties the room together. You have Rachel Sennott, who you may know well from many other things, as Rosie Schuster. Cory Michael Smith as Chevy Chase, somebody who I'd not seen before. And he looks and acts enough like Chevy Chase that after a while you're like, yeah, that's Chevy Chase. Elia Hunt as Gilda Radner. Now, she threw me because she looks nothing like Gilda Radner. But if you close your eyes, she sounds just like her. She gets the voice pattern down. She gets the very slight lisp that Gilda Radner had down if you watch her mouth. And she embodies the character. And that's, job well done. You have Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd. Now, he's got just like aviator shades, and he's got, the wig and the mustache. And I'm not going to say it's like you're watching Dan Aykroyd, but wow, it's like you're watching a really good impersonator of Dan Aykroyd. Like, there's no doubt. If you just showed me a clip from the film, and I didn't know the movie's even been made, and you're like, who's that? I'd be like, oh, that's Dan Aykroyd. Somebody being Dan Aykroyd, being 1975. Emily Fairn as Lorraine Newman. She's a much slighter character. She doesn't really look a lot or sound a lot like Lorraine Newman, but it's supposed to be Lorraine Newman. And I think in the early days of SNL, she was a little bit more in the shadows. And Matt Wood as John Belushi. He looks like Belushi, and he kind of acts like Belushi, but I do feel like we'll get into, I'm not just going to run down the entire cast. Look, and Lamorne Morris as Garrett Morris, excellent. And Kim Matula as Jane Curtin, much like in the early days of the show, sometimes the females were a little put off to the side in this. They all have their moments. Let's put it that way. And we'll get back to the Belushi thing. Every character has its character moment where you can see who this person is, what makes them tick, how they feel like they do or don't fit into the whole, how they are believing or not in this endeavor that they're about to jump blindly feet first into. The John Belushi character, I feel like, is underdeveloped in this film. Everybody else gets a lot of screen time and character moments and good lines and everything. And Belushi is just this weird, like, sedated Tasmanian devil off in the corner where he's just like, he hasn't signed his contract for the show yet and he's brooding. He doesn't want to wear the bee outfit. The one thing you learn from this movie is the character, at least in this film, of John Belushi does not want to wear the bee outfit. We don't feel like we get to know who he is as much, and that's unfortunate because Belushi was amazing. And even if what I did, and I'm sure Peacock is loving, I'm sure Peacock is seeing its hit count on episode 1 of SNL skyrocket since this movie came out. Because what I did is what I would suggest, I wish theaters could do is, I wish somebody would do a fan edit of this, is this film takes you up to the point where they say live from New York. You should then like watch that episode and then come back and then watch the credits to Saturday Night. And the end credits of this film, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but that's the kind of guy I am. I'm jumpy. The end credits of the film are an ode to the opening credits of Saturday Night Live, and they are such a celebratory moment in this film when you finally see it. They say, and again, I don't think I'm giving anything away to say they went on with the show that night. The credits roll, and it's just this, they're on the air, and it's reminding you of how badass the opening of that show was and how revolutionary that show was in its day. And it really makes you want to watch that episode, which I did. And you see John Belushi in that, and he's much more dynamic than he's portrayed in this film. And that's like probably my only real complaint here is that the Belushi character is kind of like a sort of a slight caricature, and you don't get as much of him as you do everybody else. Some other names you might recognize. Finn Wolfhard is in this film. You have Nicholas Braun is very interesting. Nicholas Braun, I realized halfway through, plays 2 roles. He plays Andy Kaufman, basically as foreign man Andy Kaufman, and he plays Jim Henson. That's maybe another quibble I have, is that the Jim Henson character feels like kind of a mocking caricature of Jim Henson as being this, goody-goody nice guy amongst all of these maniacs. And it's a bummer because, I mean, if you're like me and you grew up when I did, you kind of love Jim Henson. To see him kind of portrayed as kind of a not a simpleton, but kind of an uptight square is kind of unfortunate. And you also get, I'm blanking on his name because I'm trying to read this as we go, J.K. Simmons as Milton Berle. Milton Berle representing old style comedy, old TV. The studio that they're about to launch SNL in was originally where he did the Texaco Star Theater, or one of his earlier shows on NBC. He is walking around saying, this is cute, all you kids. Yeah, I'm real TV. I'm showbiz. You're a bunch of nothings. You're going to be gone in a half hour. That all was true, but that happened a bit later. And the movie does a bit of that, where they compress a whole lot of things to happen on the evening, 2 hours or 3 hours ahead of 11:30 p.m. EST on that Saturday night. The Milton Berle stuff did happen, but that was a little farther into the season when they had him as a guest. And I highly recommend the book, Live from New York. It's amazing. It's got amazing stories, some of which you hear elsewhere, some of which you hear in the extras on like some of the DVD sets and stuff, but really highly recommend it. So this movie, I'm rambling, very funny, captures the era really well, captures the chaos of putting on a show very well, captures for the most part all of these performers, who they were, what they were bringing to SNL in those days. Garrett Morris wondering, am I just like the token African-American on this show? I mean, they're just having me do this thing and this thing. And again, there's a moment where he sings a song on the set that's something that's in a later episode sketch. And I'm like, oh, I doubt that really happened. But you kind of, anything that's supposedly based on a true story, you kind of just have to go with it and not believe that every word of this is true. But what I know of backstage at SNL from that first season, that first night, a lot of this is fairly accurate, and a lot of this did sort of play out over the course of the first year or so of the show. So very well made, very fun. It'll make you want to watch that first season all over again. When I was a kid, I remember watching SNL as a kid with my father, and it would be, we're probably talking like 1980, 1979 or something like that. And the episode would be on live, and then the musical guest would come up, and he never cared about the musical guest, and I usually didn't either. So he would change the channel to one of our local Boston's TV 56 WLVI. They were running the Best of Saturday Night, which was like a half-hour distillation of clips from the show, and he would basically flip over to a rerun and watch, a sketch's worth of SNL, and then flip back and continue with the live program, which was kind of funny. So anyway, it was really cool watching this, because it reminded me of how much of a part of my life all these people were in my early years, and how they were just like the coolest people around, and their movies were great, and their albums were fun, and they were comedic rock stars in their day. And this is sort of shows you when they were all unsure of themselves and hadn't really done anything, but they were just filled with that excitement and that energy of, this is it, and this could be a big deal for us. It's network TV, which was still the biggest thing going at the time, other than movies. And will this flop? Will we even make it on the air? Watch Saturday Night and find out. Not that you don't already know, because 40-something years into it. I was going to say Ivan Reitman. Jason Reitman's Saturday Night.